Hello, everybody. Um, I am very happy to share this presentation about the holistic approach for zinc oxide reduction and the common practices that we are doing in the European Union. This is the agenda of the presentation today. First, we are going to introduce what is zinc oxide and how we were using it. Then we are going to go through the weaning process and we are going to describe what is happening at weaning. Then we are going to pay some attention to the protocol of cleaning and disinfection, and I will introduce a new concept, which is the seeding with a positive biofilm or positive biofilm bacteria. We are going to also dedicate some time to the influence of sound nutrition on the piglet quality as a starting point to help in the replacement of the zinc oxide. And finally, we are going to dedicate some words to the management, and we will pay special attention to colostrum. I hope you enjoy this webinar. So we are going to start with what is zinc oxide specifically, and how we were using it. As you know, zinc oxide is an essential trace element at low doses. So here in the European Union, we can still use it at 150 milligrams per kilo. So this is the legal maximum for oral ingestion. So this is what we can apply in the feed. And this zinc is required for the enzymes involved in cellular signaling. So actually, it is a factor for many enzymes involved in the metabolism. When zinc is deficient, it can result in stunted growth, in a poor feed conversion ratio, and also in skin conditions. Apart from this use, until a few months ago, we could also apply high doses of zinc oxide as a therapeutic element, and these high doses of zinc oxide, they are effective to control post-weaning diarrhea. So we could only use a specific molecule, so they should be authorized as a medicine, and we could apply them for 14 days at 3.1 kilos per ton, which is equivalent of 2,500 milligrams of zinc per kilo of feed. So as you can realize, it is much times higher compared to the application of zinc as a trace element. And with this specific application, during 14 days after weaning, we were able usually to control the problems that is typically appearing in piglets around 7 to 10 days post-weaning. But in 2007, the European Union regulation announced that zinc oxide was going to be banned. Actually, rather than banned, what they said was that no pharmacological application of zinc oxide was going to be renewed. So they stopped all the renewal of the pharmacological application of zinc oxide. And this was going to start on the 26th of June of 2022. So actually, as you can realize, around half a year ago. The zinc oxide that was still in the supply chain, it could be used until the end of its shelf life, so meaning that it could be used for 2 additional years. Here in the European Union, and it is also something important, is that the antibiotic usage is quite restricted as well. And as you can see here, if we focus on swine, this is the annual totals of antibiotics applied per different species. When we focus in swine, what we see is that from the year 2016 onwards, there has already been a strong reduction of antibiotics application in swine production. Actually, the antibiotics that have mostly been eliminated have been colistin and neomycin. What happens when we remove the antibiotics is that, okay, it is going to impact our production level. Here in this graph, it is the evolution of post-weaning mortality. And as you can see, when we move from 2016 onwards, so actually after the removal of the antibiotics, what we see is an increase in this mortality. What does that mean? It means that when we want to replace the zinc oxide, we really need to be prepared. It is a challenge for feed producers and also for swine producers. Okay, first, we are going to see how does the zinc oxide work. Actually, it works to many different ways. It has an impact on the immune system. It also has an impact on the secretion of several hormones, like, as an example, ghrelin or pancreatic enzymes. It has an antibacterial action. It also works on intestinal morphology. It is also working as an antioxidant. And finally, it is improving the digestion of feed ingredients. I would say that when a product is characterized by many actions, it is probably because the specific mode of action of the zinc oxide is not really well known, but all of these actions are connected between them. But as the main message that I want to give you with this slide is that when we were applying zinc oxide, it produced several beneficial actions for the piglets. So then, if it is so positive, why we are banning it? Why we are reducing its usage? Because zinc oxide also has a strong negative aspect. On one hand, at high doses, it becomes toxic. And actually, when you feed high levels of zinc oxide during a long time, so longer than those 2 weeks that I was mentioning before, it starts to have a negative impact for the piglets, reducing feed intake, reducing growth, etc., etc. An important point as well is that the zinc oxide is also polluting the environment. So finally, it goes through the manure. It is a heavy metal. It stands in the manure, and it can contaminate the environment. There is also an indirect generation of antibiotic resistance genes. So when we are feeding animals with high doses of zinc oxide, at the same time, we are also selecting those bacteria that are able to resist antibiotics. And as you know, today there is a very strong movement, a very strong effort being made on reducing antimicrobial resistance genes. So this is also one of the important reasons why zinc oxide has been banned. It is also increasing the tolerance to heavy metals. So it is, let's say, when we are feeding high doses of zinc oxide, the bacteria are selected towards more resistant to that zinc oxide. And finally, it is also modifying the microbial population, which is okay for the time that we are applying the zinc oxide, but when we stop using the zinc oxide, the microbial composition that we leave on the piglets many times is not good. Many times we have also been selecting not so positive bacteria. And at least here in Spain a few years ago, it was very typical that the piglets had diarrhea again at the time in which we stopped applying pharmacological doses of zinc oxide. So we move to the second part of the presentation, and here we are going to see what is happening during the weaning process. At weaning, the piglets are suffering from different sources of stress: sanitary, social stress, because we are mixing piglets with new piglets; nutritional stress, because we are completely changing the diet. We are moving from the milk to a solid diet. And apart from that, we are also applying vaccination, etc. So there is also some management of the piglets, which is also causing stress. And we taking into account that those piglets are still immature. Why they are immature? Because we are weaning the piglets much earlier compared to how we would wean them in the nature. So they are younger than what they would be in nature. Just as an example, the intestine is not yet mature. The immune system is not yet able to develop an efficient immunological answer. And apart from that, when we look, just as an example, at the capacity of the piglets to secrete enzymes or to lower the gastric pH, it is still very limited. The weaning itself is causing some digestive troubles. Just as an example, it is modifying the microbial composition, generating a dysbiosis or potentially generating a dysbiosis, and it is also having a physiological impact in the intestinal mucosa, making the intestine more permeable and allowing pathogens to penetrate through the enterocytes. And all this is finally transformed in a reduction of the farm production levels, starting with an increase in diarrhea, an increase in the need of applying individual medication, but then followed also by a reduced feed intake and a drop in the growth performance. Here in this slide, I have tried to summarize all the different events that are happening around weaning. During a few days after weaning, the piglets are not eating feed properly, so they are suffering from some level of anorexia, and this is going to have an impact on the gut barrier function. It is also going to impact the enzyme secretions. Why? Because the intestine of the piglets is the organ with a higher metabolic need. A big part of the nutrients that we are feeding the piglets with are directly used by the intestinal mucosa. When there is no feed reaching the intestinal mucosa, those enterocytes, that intestinal mucosa, is going to suffer from an atrophy. As a consequence, a big part of the nutrients are going to pass undigested through the intestinal tract, and we are going to be able to find them in the hindgut of the piglets. These nutrients, depending on which nutrients we will be able to find there, they will favor the overgrowth of some pathogens. Just as an example, when we are providing the piglets with a diet which is very rich in protein, the piglets are not going to be able to digest properly that protein, and a big amount of nitrogen will finally reach the hindgut. There in the hindgut, it can be used by enterobacteria, by specific strains of E. coli that will proliferate and will cause damage to the intestinal mucosa. So apart from that, there is also the risk, as I was mentioning before, of a strong change in the microbial composition. And at the same time, there is also an increase in the inflammatory status of the intestinal mucosa. All that put together is increasing strongly the risk of diarrhea happening to the post-weaning piglets. That was as a summary, but here I would like to focus on some specific aspects that are happening at weaning. As I was mentioning, the weaning itself has an impact on the gut morphology. So as you see here, the intestinal villi are shorter, and therefore the surface for nutrient absorption is reduced in piglets right after weaning. The enzymatic capacity of the piglets right after weaning is not well adapted for cereal digestion. So actually, before weaning, when the piglets were receiving a milk diet, they were more able to secrete lactase rather than amylase or pepsin and trypsin, which are more adapted to digest cereals. And this, at the time in which we wean the piglets, the shift is not yet produced, and therefore that means that the piglets are not going to be very able to digest the ingredients that we are including into the diets. And also there is, as I was mentioning before, an impact on the permeability of the intestinal membrane. Having a look to the gut microbial composition, what we see at weaning time is first a reduction on the number of different bacterial species. So the richness, the diversity of the microbial composition is reduced in piglets right after weaning. But also there is a very fast change on the microbial composition. And here we are talking about big groups. So before weaning, we observe a higher abundance of bacteroides. And after weaning, there is a shift and there is an increase on the abundance of Prevotelaceae. When microbial composition is changing very fast, there is a strong risk that potential pathogens like E. coli or Clostridium, they take the opportunity to proliferate, to grow, and to colonize. So when a big change is happening on the microbial composition, we are going to see a strong risk for these pathogens proliferating and causing damage. And apart from that, as I was mentioning, weaning is pro-inflammatory. Here in this slide, I would like to share some very recent information published by the University of Nottingham, and they are comparing piglets weaned and non-weaned from the same litters, actually. So they are brothers, but some of them have been weaned, some of them have not been weaned. And they were measuring the plasma cortisol level. So as you can see, the weaning itself is causing a strong stress to the piglets. The cortisol level is much higher in the piglets that have been weaned compared to their brothers that have not been weaned. And apart from that, when they were looking at transcriptomics, so to the genes that were upregulated or downregulated, in the weaning itself was causing a very strong and very clear impact in the genes that were transcribed. So let's say the enterocytes, they were reacting towards the winning process. So now we go to the solution. All right, we have identified the problem, but what are the solutions that we can, how can we manage the winning as such in order to be successful when there is no zinc oxide, and the antibiotics that we can use, they are also quite reduced. And from our point of view, we should do it globally. So the approach should be holistic, and we like to name it as a from outside in holistic approach, starting from the hygiene, which involves cleaning, disinfection, and seeding with a positive biofilm, following by the sound nutrition. And what we believe is that the sound nutrition has a very strong influence on the piglet's quality at weaning time. Management, which is also quite important, and then of course nutrition, so the feed formulation, the ingredients that we select, etc. The health and the management of health through biosecurity and vaccination. And finally, the management of the intestinal health with the application of specific functional ingredients or feed additives like probiotics and prebiotics. In today's presentation, we are going to deal with the hygiene, with the sound nutrition and piglet quality, and with the management. And we are going to leave nutrition and gut health management for the next webinar. So, starting with the cleaning and disinfection, some concept that you are maybe familiar with is that the buildings can become pig sick. So actually, when we have been producing pigs in the same buildings for a long time, the building itself can transmit several specific microbes that can activate the immune response of the piglets and have an impact on the growth. I would say that this is especially important when we have been producing pigs in the same buildings, but we have, just as an example, increased the prolificacy of our sows, meaning that today we are putting more piglets into the same space that in the past we used to occupy with less number of piglets. And this, of course, is also going to have an impact. The targets that we have with the cleaning and disinfection protocol are to reduce the disease challenge to the herd, to improve the animal health, the welfare, and the pork safety, and to increase the growth and efficiency of the herd. There are 6 basic steps of cleaning and disinfection. First, we need to remove the organic matter, because disinfectants, they are not going to work when there is organic matter. Then we need to use a detergent, then we need to clean, then we need to dry, then we need to disinfect, and the concept that I would like to introduce today is the application of a positive biofilm. So here in this graph, what we see is that after the cleaning and disinfection steps, we are able to reduce the bacterial load. And then the positive biofilm implies seeding the building, I mean the floor, the walls, etc., with a positive biofilm. When we do that, the positive biofilm will proliferate, and then by competitive exclusion, it will make more difficult for the undesirable bacteria to proliferate later on when we introduce animals into the pens. the mechanisms that are triggering the exclusion of undesirable microorganisms by this positive biofilm are anti-adhesive effects. So these positive biofilm are able to produce specific molecules that provide anti-adhesive properties against the pathogens. Also by spatial competition, so the specific spaces that this positive biofilm occupies is more difficult that it will be occupied by undesirable bacteria. Nutritional competition, so if the positive bacteria are able to use the nutrients that are available, those nutrients are not anymore available for the undesirable bacteria. And finally, by microbial interference. Something also important is that when we manage, when we apply positive biofilms into our buildings, we are going to reduce undesirable bacteria reaching the supply chain. So we are going to reduce the chance that the undesirable bacteria have to colonize the manure and then the fields, the environment, and finally the consumer. So here, this is an example of management with positive biofilm. So here, when we compare, this is the relative microbial composition in the slat floor and in the plastic walls, comparing a group in which positive biofilm was seeded and a group and a control group. So in the case of the positive biofilm, as you can see, most of the bacteria 4 days after applying the positive biofilm are made of Pediococcus, which is a lactic acid bacteria, while in the control group, this percentage is richer, is occupied by Staphylococcus, meaning that when we apply the positive biofilm, there is a large superiority of lactic acid beneficial bacteria compared to the control group, and therefore reducing the microbial contamination risk. And this is a practical example coming from a commercial farm in France, in which they compare a control with the positive seeding with a positive biofilm. And here, what they are comparing is the coliform population. And as you can see, especially after introducing the animals, after introducing the piglets into the pens, the relative, so in the control group, we have more pens which are medium or highly contaminated compared to the group in which the positive biofilm had been introduced. As a consequence, what we could also measure was a reduction on the percentage of mortality in the pens that had been seeded with the positive biofilm. So this application of a positive biofilm does not only have a positive impact on microbial population, but we can also see the effect on the performance on the production parameters as well. We move now to another useful tool to help piglets in a situation in which we are not applying pharmacological zinc oxide. And in this case, we are going to talk about sound nutrition and the piglet's quality. Actually, to me, this is a very important starting point. So previously, with the positive biofilm, the idea is, okay, if we put the piglets into pens which are more hygienic from an immunological point of view, it is less likely that those piglets will suffer from diarrhea, will be colonized by pathogens, etc. In this case, rather than the place we are, when we are including the piglets, we are looking into where are the piglets coming from. So what was the influence from the mother to the piglets? Here there are some very important aspects. Just as an example, the birth weight, the maturity of those piglets, and here it is also important to take into account how old are we weaning those piglets. If we wean the piglets too early, those piglets are going to be very immature. Another effect that the mother can have is on the vitality on the of the piglet. So how vital those piglets are just after birth, because that is also going to influence the colostrum intake, which, as we are going to see later, is very important. The mother is also important because the neonatal diarrhea, so the diarrhea happening to the piglets during the first week of life, it is going to be influenced by the mother, and especially by the microbial composition the mother is going to transmit to the piglets. Then the milk production will, of course, influence the development of the piglets. And finally, the discovery of the solid feed. This is something that we are going to deal in the next webinar, but management of feed before weaning, so offering a crib feed, is also something useful to improve how those piglets are going to perform after weaning. I would like to start speaking about the mother just with the introduction of the imprinting concept. Maybe you are familiar. In the past, there were some studies saying that when we were offering the sow some specific flavors, if those flavors were later on also introduced in the piglet diets, the piglets were going to recognize those flavors, and therefore they will eat more feed of those more feed containing those flavors, meaning that there was a type of reminder, a type of imprinting. Here, what I would like to speak is about the microbial transmission from the sow to the piglet. And actually, this microbial transmission is happening through several pathways. Piglets right after birth, they are sterile or close to sterile, so they do not have a microbial population. And during the first hours of life, they will be colonized by, of course, by the bacteria that they find in the environment. But those bacteria that they will find in the environment, a big part of them are mainly coming from the sow. Here, in this slide, a big part that I would like to indicate, that I would like to show, is that especially in the hindgut of the sow, in the cecum and in the colon, there is a strong influence on the microbial population of the piglets during several weeks after birth, coming from the microbial composition of the sow feces even before farrowing. So the message that I want to give you here is that sow microbial composition is very important when it comes to influence piglet microbial composition, not just at birth, but also during a few weeks after birth. And in this case, I would like to introduce some results that we obtained in Lallemand, in which we were doing a trial applying a specific probiotic to the sows, Lebus LSB, and we were able to clearly differentiate microbial population of piglets coming from probiotic fed sows, and we were able to differentiate those microbial profiles from the piglets coming from control sows up to 20 days after weaning. So in this case, we are also able to speak about a maternal imprinting concept. The main message here is that when we are feeding the sows with some specific components, in this case with the Boulardii probiotic, we are also going to influence the piglet microbial profile, not just during lactation, but also even after lactation, even 20 days after we separate the piglets from their mothers. This concept that I was mentioning about this microbial imprinting also has an impact on the performance results of those piglets. In this case, we are comparing piglets fed with the same diet, so the only difference is the application or not of the probiotic to the mother. And what we see is that during the first 2 weeks after weaning, piglets that are coming from mothers fed with the Boulardii, they are able to grow at an 18% stronger growth rate. And there is also a difference during the following feed. And globally, during the first 5 weeks after weaning, those piglets with the same diet, so influence only for the application of the probiotic to the sow, they are able to grow by 10% more compared to the control. And what is more, we can apply this strategy of improving the sow nutrition and therefore influence the piglets to replace antibiotics or zinc oxide in the piglets. In this case, it is coming from the same trial. The piglets, they were fed with a white feed, so not, let's say, non-containing antibiotics or pharmacological zinc oxide, or with a feed containing antibiotics or pharmacological zinc oxide. And here we compare the feeding of the sow, control, or Boulardii applied into the sow, and then the diet applied to the piglets. In this case, this group contained, the blue group contains the same, was offered the same diet in piglets as in the gray group, while the purple group, the diet for piglets contained antibiotic, which was amoxicillin, and pharmacological application of zinc oxide. The main message that I would like to give you here is that when the piglets that were coming from Boulardii fed sows, they are able to grow at the same pace as the piglets that are coming from control sows, but fed with antibiotic and pharmacological zinc oxide. So again, applying the probiotic to the sows in gestation and lactation is already an important tool to help piglets right after weaning. Now we are going to talk about management and some tips about management. First, when talking about management, this is something that we have already mentioned, but working on biosecurity, having a strong cleaning, disinfection, and positive biofilm application is important to reduce the opportunity for bacteria and viruses to take hold. It is also important to offer the piglets an easy access to water. And here the point is that pigs that drink a lot, they will also eat a lot. But apart from easy accessibility to the water should be of good quality so that it doesn't cause any negative impact on the piglets. Proper management of lighting is also important. Offering a crib feed before weaning, it is important as well to reduce the stress of the piglets after weaning. I was saying before, but weaning weight, so try to wean piglets which are heavy and which are mature enough. It's also quite important. Allow them extra feeding space, so not allowing them to, let's say, to fight for the place at the trap. Comfortable temperature, it is really very important. So I know that today energy is a strong cost, but when we are not providing the right temperature in the rooms where we are going to put the piglets right after weaning, they will suffer a lot, and this is something that we will see very clearly on the performance results and on the increase of disease and especially diarrhea. And finally, globally speaking, handling the piglets with care is, of course, very important to reduce potential damages to the piglets. Following with some management tips, we are going to dedicate a few words to colostrum. And here I would like to introduce that pigs, they have an epitheliochorial placenta, meaning that the piglets are born without maternally derived antibodies or immune cells. Why? Because the barrier, the placental barrier, is too strong, and these compounds like antibodies or immune cells, they are not able to pass from the mother to the piglet. Therefore, it is important for the piglets to receive immunoglobulins through the colostrum, but the colostrum passage has two important limiting factors. First of all, the immunoglobulin G, which are the type of immunoglobulins that are going to be able to pass from the mother to the piglets through the colostrum, they are only actively transported into the mammary gland cells during a maximum of 18 to 24 hours after the start of farrowing. So there is already a limitation here. But even on the piglet's intestine, there is only a window of opportunity for the immunoglobulin G to penetrate and to pass to the bloodstream, also during a maximum of 24 to 36 hours after birth. After that specific period of time, this passage is not going to be efficient anymore. So the level of immunoglobulin G in the colostrum will come down, and apart from that, the piglet will not be able to absorb those immunoglobulin G. So when it comes to the colostrum management, it is important to pay attention to the three Qs: quality, quantity, and quickly. Starting with the quantity and quickly, well, for the quantity, it is difficult to know that piglets have had enough. So we should try to encourage the piglets to suck as much colostrum as possible. And in order to do that, especially when we are challenged with a huge litter size, and maybe the number of piglets is bigger than the number of teats, there are some practices that we can apply, such as split suckling, which is separating piglets so that we can divide the litter and we can allow only 50% of the piglets to suckle at each time. Assisted suckling, which to me it is quite important, but of course it requires a strong labor. So it requires people spending nights maybe in the farm, or it requires to synchronize the farrowing so that the farrowings are going to happen at the time in which we are going to have people in the farm. And another potential solution, also quite labor intensive, is the hand feeding of colostrum. Quickly, yeah, it is important that the piglets take colostrum during the first 30 minutes after birth to get energy, because they are going to lose temperature quite fast. So it is important that they are able to get some energy from the sow. And later on, during the first 6 to 12 hours, it is important for the immunity. So for what I was mentioning in the previous slide. And then the sow is going to be suckled every approximately 30 minutes. And the gut closure, so the time in which the intestine will not longer be open for absorption of immunoglobulin G, is going to be gradual, but it is increasing after the first feed. And with regards to the quality, there are some tools that we can use to improve the level of antibodies. And in our case, with the application of the Boulardii strain with the probiotic, I would like to show you just a couple of results. This is a comparison in 15 Danish farms in which we are comparing farms that are not applying the probiotic with farms that are applying the probiotic. And we are measuring the level of immunoglobulin G through the application of a refractometer. So first of all, here you can see how along the time the level of immunoglobulin G is coming down in both cases, but you can see as well how in the farms that in which the sows are fed with the probiotic, the immunoglobulin G level is higher compared to the control sows. And in this case, it is a comparison in 11 Colombian farms. So it's a kind of meta-analysis of different farms in which they compare before and after the application of the probiotic. Here, the main message that I wanted to say is that before and after using the probiotic, what we see is that out of the poor samples, 80% of the samples were belonging to the control group, so to the sows not fed with the probiotic, while 20% of the samples were belonging to the sows fed with the probiotic. When we go to the other extreme, it is the opposite actually. What we see is that out of the very good samples, most of them were belonging to the sows fed with the probiotic, while much less samples were belonging to the control group. So just to finish, I would like to share with you a few take-home messages. Zinc oxide is no longer available at high doses in the European Union since June 2022. There are several negative impacts to piglets at weaning. So this was actually the reason why zinc oxide was used. And those negative impacts are increasing the risk of diarrhea. As we have seen, there is an impact on the gut morphology and permeability. There is an impact on the microbial balance, and there is also an inflammation happening to piglets right after weaning. Our recommendation to replace or to produce piglets without pharmacological doses of zinc oxide is to work under an outside-in holistic approach. So taking into account several aspects, because there is no single bullet, but there are complementary actions that we can do in order to improve piglet production conditions. We can work on the hygiene, we can work on the sow, we can also work on the nutrition of the piglets, on the management, etc. Today, in this presentation, we have also seen how the application of positive biofilms, positive seeding of the environments where we are going to allocate the piglets, it's complementary and is completing the cleaning and disinfection protocol. and it is making more difficult for pathogenic bacteria to proliferate. We have also seen the importance of sound nutrition to produce high-quality piglets at weaning, and we have paid special attention to the imprinting concept, especially in this case, the microbial imprinting concept, the transmission of microbiota from the sow to the piglets, and how this can influence piglet performance later on. And finally, we have dedicated some minutes to speak about management. The objective with the management is to reduce the stress of the piglets. And we have also been talking about the importance of colostrum, that we could also speak about it as the elixir of life, the importance of colostrum in order to improve the immunological capacity of the piglets after weaning. With that, I just would like to tell you thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the webinar.